Welcome to the Talent Equation Podcast. If you are passionate about helping young people to unleash their potential and want to find ways to do that better, then you've come to the right place. The Talent Equation Podcast seeks to answer the important questions facing parents, coaches, and talent developers as they try to help young people become the best they can be. This is a series of unscripted, unpolished conversations between people at the razor's edge of the talent community who are prepared to share their knowledge, experiences, and challenges in an effort to help others get better faster. Listen, reflect, and don't forget to join the discussion at thetalentequation.co.uk. Enjoy the show.
So, we're here, delightful day, open university, lovely spot, just been doing some filming about coach development and being a coach of coaches. Anyway, Lucy Moore, welcome to the Talent Equation.
Thank you very much for having me.
Long time overdue guest, given that we cross paths a lot, both professionally and outside of work in the sports arena.
Yep.
Tell the world your story, your journey.
Oh gosh, so thank you very much for having me. It has been a long time coming, and so I've been thinking about how I would introduce myself should I have the chance to be on the Talent Equation. And I guess it's probably easiest to work with now and work backwards. So currently I have a role working for Sport England as a coach development manager, and previous to that have worked for GB Hockey, for the FA in more of a sports development role. I've owned my own coaching company and started life as a PE teacher. But I think my coaching story started long before any of that. And interestingly, over the last few months, my parents have been cleaning out the family home, and it transpires that I am the same person in my 30s as I was when I was 7. And they found a lot of things, such as certificates that I would produce for my younger sister or my friends to reward them for achieving things like climbing trees. And I think as a small child I was quite bossy. I liked organising events and people, coaching them to do things, whatever that might be, and now I get paid to do that for a job, which is quite cool.
So if you're anything like me, I think I can resonate with that. My coaching career began when I was busily trying to encourage people to play the game by the rules I wanted to play the game by.
Yep, totally. I have a long-suffering younger sister who would end up playing in goal for whatever sport it was, or being trained to be a ball girl for Wimbledon because we'd acquired a piece of mesh and strung it up in the garden. So yeah, she's been fully the victim of my aspirations to be a coach.
See, that's interesting, because that's like that we definitely have that in common. The put upon younger sibling,
yeah,
who was basically just there to facilitate our own development as players.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've listened to your podcast a lot, and siblings and backyard play was a massive feature for me. So my parents aren't in any way sporty whatsoever, and so really my sports interest came quite organically and was something that I just enjoyed doing, and most of that was outside, trying to make up my own games and encourage other people to play with me.
So what got you into sport in the first place then?
My grandfather was a part-time groundskeeper at the Harlequins at the Stoop.
Oh, okay.
And so there's unbeknownst
Twickenham
to me,
gal.
Yeah, so unbeknownst to me, there was my first sporting activity was kicking a rugby ball on the Stoop, so that's quite cool. And then just generally a sporty kid. I think I was a bit of a tomboy and enjoyed being out and about, but no organised formal coaching until I found hockey in secondary school, and then was encouraged to go to the local club, and that was when I started my sports volunteering, because I had such a great time going to this club that I decided I should take my friends along as well. So created my own poster and put it up in the school and drummed up people that way. So my job is as much part of who I am as it is what I do for a living, and so it's amazing.
So you found hockey because what, PE?
Yeah, so like I say, a bit of a tomboy, enjoyed playing football in the playground at primary school, never had any formal coaching or anything like that. Went to secondary school, girls don't do football. Although I wrote a strongly worded letter to the head teacher about the red PE knickers and the fact there wasn't a girls football team, didn't carry a lot of traction. Like I say, the same person I was when I was 11. So yeah, it was, this is like football, here's a stick, and found an instant affinity for it. And I guess I remember very clearly my first ever hockey lesson being taken to the end of the red grass pitch, and the teacher telling us that we should try and hit the ball as far as we could, and well, in my head my ball flew down the other end of the pitch, but it went quite far, and I was hooked. In hindsight, I look back on that lesson, I think how many of those kids enjoyed hockey when they couldn't hit their ball very far. But for me it was a momentous day. Because
you were one of the able ones.
Because I was one of the able ones, and I don't know why or how. Possibly fluke, but of the one ball I got to hit, it went quite well. And
so all those backyard games had obviously stood you in good stead.
Yeah,
ball striking.
Quite possibly, and then it became kind of my obsession, and so then playing in the garden on the patio, trying to stop the ball from going in the laurel hedge, became my game. And then of course my sister got roped into either fielding the ball out of the hedge or becoming the goalkeeper, borrowing the kit from the club, which was like cricket pads and some dodgy gardening gloves, and subjecting her to that. So she really has had the rough end.
So then you mentioned earlier, just circling back to that, your journey, you went into coaching because how old were you when you first volunteered and started helping others?
I think I can remember helping out at younger age group sports days when I was in primary school. So helping out in that respect, and then as soon as I found hockey, that became my thing, and going back to your primary school to help out with sports stuff, and just straight away trying to drum up more people helping at my club. And then the first formal coaching, I was probably 12 or 13 doing stuff.
Wow.
But I can remember doing that. Hockey wise, I guess later teens I became more interested in doing it and helping out with the younger age groups, and having the opportunity to go and do outreach in primary schools and that kind of stuff. And as soon as I could drive, I used it as a way to make money. So that it was a lucrative career to go and
in your
get cash.
When you're in your your late teens, early 20s, you've got choices, haven't you? You're probably doing it alongside study.
Yeah, so I at some point had to do a work experience project and decided I wanted to go to Bath University. So I was probably in secondary school at that point. When the time came, I applied for Bath University to do sports science, because if you're sporty, that's what you do, and got told no because I wasn't smart enough. I didn't have the A-level sciences that I needed to do that. But by some fortune, the admissions person saw something in my application and replied and said, we've got this new course starting up. It's only been going a year or maybe two, and it's called Coach Education Sports Development, and it's in the School of Education, so you might not have seen it when you looked in the prospectus, but we think you'd be really suited for that. So obviously didn't read the prospectus, just said yes because I decided I was going to Bath University by hook or by crook, and ended up doing that course, which it's serendipity. And if I could find that that admissions tutor and say thank you, that would be amazing, because without that I wouldn't do what I do now. And it was literally the dream course. It was sociology, it was coaching, it was a little bit of nutrition, it was sports development, it was people, it was me in a university course, and I didn't even know it was there. So yeah, it's definitely been a bit of fluke along the way.
The if you think about the kind of some of the fortune that you have in your life, I often think about that. Mine was, I've spoken about it several times, being caught on the Astro. I mean, I went to do A levels and they put a AstroTurf pitch, a double AstroTurf pitch at the school. I mean, what were they expecting? Just should have been in A level art. And the teacher came out and, what are you doing? Have a career in sport. Oh, okay, that's a good idea. But also, interestingly, failing my A levels first time round, or not getting the grades, and was thinking about doing sports science. And the second time round thought better of it and did sport and human movement, which was far broader. And I think back now, I just wasn't suited to sports science.
No, I don't think. I think that it's a hell of a lot of biomechanics and maths, and that's not my strength. It's very sciencey. It's also the cohort in that particular university was much bigger for sports science. And I think whilst I was being bold and going to university, I suited a smaller cohort of people. So my group was probably 35 students, whereas I think sports science was 100 and something. So in terms of that, it was much better suited to me, not just the content but also the way it was delivered, and much more practical. And it was a random lucky choice.
The thing for me, I think, about it, back then, if you had two routes in sport, you either went and became a PE teacher or you did sports science. They were the kind of only two real career options. And there was a kind of emergent sports development kind of career choice, but it was still pretty early days. I mean, I didn't know that there was such a thing as sports development officers at this point. I don't think many of us did. But they grew, and I was fortunate enough to get those kinds of roles. I mean, I even at the point of completion of my degree, the only route that most of us had was to do a further year, train as a PE teacher, and crack on. And I didn't do that because I went to do a postgrad. And then I then decided to not do that and went back, and I was waiting to do my PGCE. But then it was, and then I got a job as a sports development officer as a kind of part-time temporary role that became permanent, and the rest is history. But it's like, when I look back, I think, God, the paths I could have gone down.
It's the people you meet and the random fortunes of jobs and opportunities. I think, like summer holiday work in kids camps, that's what I did as a job. And then you meet somebody and then they say, oh, have you thought about doing proper coaching, and then have you done this and that and the other, and then I finished university, and fortunately my old sixth form college were looking for somebody to do sports development, so I ended up doing that job, and it was part-time. And then they said, oh, do you want to do some teaching? So I started teaching a sports leaders award, and was considering becoming a teacher properly, full-time, but it wasn't my vocation, it wasn't my calling. And I think if you want to be a teacher, it has to be your heart and soul. I think I could have been an alright teacher, but to be an exceptional teacher, it has to be a vocation, because it's a lifestyle choice, and it is an incredibly rewarding job. But
we're just going over by those screens over there, so not far away.
There you go. We've just been recording. That's what happens.
Still in filming mode.
So,
you guys staying for lunch or?
Just circling back to that, if we were rudely interrupted. We were talking about careers and all those sorts of things. I think you're right. I've got huge admiration for people who go into teaching, because I do think it's a ridiculously challenging job. And I do think, like you say, I think it has to be a vocation. I do think it's one of those things you can't go into it half-hearted. And I think I probably could have been a decent teacher. But I think, from my perspective, I feel very fortunate that I found sports development, and then subsequently coach development, talenting, all that sort of stuff, because that's just been the thing for me, really, is to follow my coaching journey and then follow the opportunities to develop others as coaches. Which brings me on to just want to reflect on this, because I was just thinking actually earlier when you were talking about your childhood and bossing your sister around, or being quite skillful, and I've actually got good experience of that, because our first meeting, I suppose, was when I'm working in the hockey club as a volunteer, as a member of our committee, and you're our regional manager.
Yeah.
And we have some like meetings and, you know, other clubs, and one of the things I remember.
Oh God, it's so scary.
No, yeah, see, you don't know where I'm going to go now, do you?
No.
But one of the things I remember is coming away from those meetings, and I'd have quite a lot of really good ideas, and we've made some great connections with the people, and there's lots of action, and you didn't have any.
Yeah.
Now that's a skill right there.
Yeah, that is a skill. Yeah, I don't know where that comes from. It is a skill. I think it's about, for me, it's sports development, and this isn't shirking the idea that I shouldn't have taken away any actions, but I'm
being a bit unfair. You did have actions.
Sports development, really. I started out my career very much trying to tell people to do stuff, but if you don't have a genuine commitment from those people and it doesn't work for them and it doesn't fit with them, you're only ever going to get superficial buy-in, and you're never going to get any real traction, and then it's not going to survive, it's not going to be sustainable. And I think sometimes sports development is quite short-termist in its views, and so the only way is to really understand the challenges that those people, whatever capacity it is that they're facing, and help them to find a solution that fits for them, which might include some input from you. But yeah, if you turn up and try and force somebody a product or a program that doesn't fit any needs that they have, it's a much harder sell, and it probably won't last or have any intention that you meant it to.
But it was also brilliant that a couple of things. I mean, I think partly everything refers back to Newell's Triangle.
Yeah.
But the task you had as a regional manager, you know, you had hundreds of clubs that you had to prioritise. There was one of you. You were in a team of what, 8?
There were 12 of us.
12
okay.
Of us, yeah. But you're nationwide, and you've not just got a brief around like a specific area like coaching.
Yep.
It's all aspects. It's club development, it's coaching, it's volunteering, it's all the whole agendas.
Yeah.
And you're doing that across a fairly big area, mostly with volunteers who can only meet you in the evenings.
Yeah.
And if you were to try and do stuff for them, that would become very quickly unsustainable.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be serving their needs particularly well anyway, because the clubs themselves, or the people in those clubs, they need to take ownership of the change and the actions.
Yeah.
You can't do it for them.
Yeah.
And now there's things you probably can facilitate, like for example, you know, you might have resources available, or you might have access to and signpost people to funding or whatever it might be, but ultimately it's for those individuals to take their own actions.
Yeah.
And that's really, so I think the environment that you were in, the task you had, combined with your own skills, meant that firstly that was where you chose to work, but also you didn't really, in reality, I mean, you probably would do that regardless of the task, I imagine.
Yeah.
Just because you believe in empowering others rather than kind of doing stuff for them or telling them what to do.
Yeah. I think I would genuinely take that approach with most things, and actually if there's a development point for me as a coach and as a person, it's actually sometimes being okay to tell and being more assertive and having a stance that is your own. I think for me, I would develop myself in those areas. I'm very conscious about that.
So that's interesting, the idea of you need to be more tell. So traditionally, you know, we talk about the idea of in coaching and coach development, the idea of like tell is bad.
Yeah.
So why do you come to that conclusion?
So I think there's a really interesting model which maybe we could share so people can see it visually. But it's a quadrant, 4 corners, and in the bottom right-hand corner, as you look at it, is aggressive, and then you move to sort of to the left-hand side of that is disingenuous, and above that is ruinous empathy, and then the top right-hand corner is all about being candid, so having real honest feedback, honest conversations. And I think when I started out being quite bossy as a coach, I was probably in the aggressive, over-assertive, telling. I then got worried that people would not like me if I was like that, so I ended up being disingenuous and fake and never actually really telling anybody anything or offering an opinion, and it becomes fake and false.
Right.
I've moved beyond that quite quickly, but then I kind of got into that ruinous empathy space where I ask lots of questions, we have lots of conversations, but sometimes I just need to tell you, because we're just going round and round in circles.
Ruinous empathy.
And we have a lovely chat and we talk for days. I can have 2-hour conversations with a coach or a volunteer, and actually sometimes I do need to just be able to offer them a bit of something so that we can then talk around it, because actually you end up being quite vague and no one really knows what you're talking about. So being a bit braver in that sense. So that being in ruinous empathy is less about protecting myself and more about protecting them. So it's more about me worrying about hurting their feelings, whereas in the past maybe it had been about worrying about them not liking me.
Right.
So I'm working on it, and I definitely am, and I think my questioning is a real strength of my coaching, but therefore I lean on it too much sometimes.
So how do you... It's a really interesting... I've not come across that model before, and now you've mentioned it, I'm kind of beginning to question where I sit on it.
Yeah.
But how do you, candid?
Yeah.
Is that's sort of an optimal place to be, or do you move around?
You would move around. I don't think it's like you live in there.
The idea of ruinous empathy suggests to me that that's somewhere you don't want to be.
Yeah, you're over empathetic, so you can be candid and you can still ask questions and provoke thought, but you're coming from an honest place and in a compassionate place, and equally you can deliver something that's maybe not a positive message, something that might be quite hard for somebody to hear, but you can do it from a compassionate place.
Okay.
And you use all your skills, like your questioning or showing them something to deliver that message.
Right.
Yeah. So you would move around it a lot, but you can get too empathetic and too nice.
So I'm assuming then that if you move from the ruinous empathy towards candid, then you're moving away from the over empathetic side of things, more honest, but you don't want to slide down into an aggressive.
You don't want to fall into aggressive and it all being about you again, because the point of that box is, the things on the top half of the line are about them.
Okay.
It's all about them.
Right.
If it's the bottom half of the line, it's all about you.
Right.
So it might be that you're being disingenuous because you're protecting yourself, and actually it's all about you. Aggressive, that's all about you too. The top half of the line is about them, so we still want it to be about them.
That requires some absolutely brutal self-awareness, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
How did you how did you arrive at that model? Where did you kind of find it from, and how have you managed that?
Yeah, so the model is something I've came across in a leadership course training thing, but it's one that Sheryl Sandberg is quite famous for using.
Facebook CEO.
Yeah.
Right.
So she's got a book called Lean In, which is it's good, but I guess I challenge some of it in terms of it's very much trying to encourage women to adopt strong leadership habits and explain the leadership habits that men might have, and encouraging them to adopt those, which I'm not sure I wholeheartedly believe in, because I think you can be a different kind of leader and still be strong. You don't have to exhibit those certain traits, but it's an interesting book nevertheless. So that's where I came across it, and I just thought it resonated with me because of the really lengthy conversations, and there's probably coaches out there who've had long telephone calls with me when they're like, where are you going with this, Lucy? Like, how we've been on the phone for 2.5 hours, we've had a lovely chat, but so what? And there is a bit of that building rapport, but sometimes it'd probably be quicker just to tell them something and then have a conversation about it.
So you're placing tell inside a candid box.
Yeah, so I think tell questions there are kind of tools that you'd use in order to exhibit those things. So I think you can be aggressive with a question.
Oh yeah, 100%. I've been on the receiving end of that.
So those are tools. And when I deliver coach development courses, people say, "Oh, what's the deal with questions?" It's like, questions are great, but they have to be natural and they have to come from a curious place.
Okay. Unless
you want it to be a tell question. So for an example, I had a coach, and I talked about questions, and I don't think I'd explained it very well, and he rang me up and he said, "I tried that question thing that you said, Lucy, at the weekend, and it didn't work. They didn't say anything." And I said, "All right, that's interesting. What did you ask?" And he said, "Well, I went over to them and I said, 'Do you think that was good enough?'" And I thought, he's not done anything wrong. I've told him to open his half-time talk with a question. That is what he did. He's followed that instruction directly. So questions can be aggressive. Questions can be tell. It's all interwoven. I think because of my tendency to lean towards questions, I can fall into being too empathetic and trying to guide that person somewhere. And if I really genuinely want to be candid, I have to drip in a bit of tell.
So I suppose this is something I've reflected on for myself actually as a coach developer, because I've got a tendency to tell. Definitely have. And my big development area, my big work on has been the kind of moving away from that and kind of providing that space, designing the space to allow people to explore, learn, develop, using questions as a means, essentially as a means to draw attention, raise awareness of something, or and then invite information through that question. But I found that there's been times when I just can't get there with somebody, that just can't get through, and I usually put it down to a failure of myself to be able to ask the right questions or ask the questions in the right way. But what you're saying is actually sometimes it just isn't possible to keep going, and actually keeping going would be worse. So that's where you might have to then go, what about that? Even that's a question. But you might be more directive. It could be couched as a question, or you could say, you could do this. Still a question. I'm trying to think of it how. But you can basically propose something, or you can suggest something. Or as opposed. Interestingly, I always try and phrase it that way rather than just say, do this. But in either way, it's still framed as a question. But the point is that what we're trying to do is to invite somebody to consider something. Now is that what you're talking about? That sort of, it's more didactic in the sense of you are giving somebody something rather than just allow them to sort of arrive at something. But it's not an instruction necessarily.
So you wouldn't give them a solution. So if I said to you, "Stu, you talk too much,"
wouldn't be the first time.
Stop talking. That's going to have a certain response. If I said to you at the beginning of the session, you said you wanted to hear what the athletes thought, you spoke for 26 of the 30 minutes. But that's a statement of fact. I'm telling you something, but encouraging you to have a reflection. And I'm sure that's not the best example that could be out there, but it's something I'm trying to be braver at, because previously I would have attacked that conversation perhaps with, "So how do you think it went? Did you hear much from them? What questions did you ask?" And we would go round and round. And if you had no self-awareness of how much you spoke, actually we could get to a more meaningful discussion quicker if I'd just given you that piece of information that I had in my head, rather than falling into that question pantomime of trying to get you to guess what's in my head. Because that's not a real conversation. That's fake. That's questioning for question's sake. You're not genuinely curious. Whereas,
is that disingenuous? That's somewhere between disingenuous and ruinous empathy, isn't it?
That depends on your motivation. So am I doing that to protect myself because I don't want you to hate me because I've been horrid to you? Or is that me worrying about you losing all of your self-confidence and self-esteem because I've said something to you that's hard. So it's where does my motivation lie as the person who's having that conversation.
Okay, that's interesting. So it's so just let me just follow into that example that you use. There's two examples you've just given actually, and I'd like to go further into them because I think they're interesting stories and I think they can pull out a little bit what you're talking about. So in the case of earlier when you said I asked that question and he said it didn't work, and you've got this individual who's basically gone to half-time and said, do you think that was good enough? Right? I dread to think what they would have said previously.
Well, I don't think they would.
They'd have said that wasn't good enough.
They weren't invited to speak at half time. It would be, they were presented with information about what had happened. He wanted to encourage some reflection and some ownership and some drive and some motivation, and then tried to do that with a question. It came from a good place, but it still wasn't a curious question. It was a question, but it wasn't a curious question because he didn't really want them to tell him. He wasn't genuinely interested on whether they thought it was good enough.
He wanted to get a message across.
He wanted to say that wasn't good enough, and he wanted to spark something in them to do something. And
it had the exact opposite response.
Well, they just had silence. So I couldn't tell you how they performed afterwards. I feel like they won the game, but I don't know whether that had any bearing on anything whatsoever. What
did you say in that scenario with that individual who was asked, who basically said that to you? What was your response when they said it didn't work?
So that's where I was saying having a conversation about what were you trying to get from it, which is how I know that he was trying to put something under them and spark them.
What the intent was.
Yeah, why did you ask that question? Because my instruction to him was very direct. Try it. Just try it. Go on, try it this time. Try it. Next week, try it. Open with a question. See what happens. They will talk to you, because he was saying this new approach doesn't work because they never speak. Just try it. Just try it. And that's a shortcoming of my explanation as to why you'd ask a question. I just told him to ask a question. That is what he did.
So he didn't have the why.
He didn't know why he was asking a question.
So that's your reflection then.
Because he felt like he was asking that question and was expecting a reply, but didn't really know why a question would have got more conversation than a statement.
More than that, I think he expecting he probably had a preconceived idea of what the response should be.
Yeah.
And when that response didn't meet with his expectations, his response to you was it didn't work. So it's interesting that, isn't it, that the idea that it didn't work can only be defined by it didn't meet the expectation I had, or their response didn't meet the expectation I had. So it's not that it didn't work necessarily, because it could have worked. Just didn't work from his perspective.
He didn't get more chat. But it's hard, and that's why I think adult learning and coach development. So I do a lot less coaching of sport now. I do more coaching of coaches and designing things and working with system stakeholders to think about how we help people get better at their jobs, and so it's further away, but I find it fascinating because everybody is unique and you can't make an assumption about why somebody's done something or what they were thinking unless you genuinely have a conversation with them.
And that's the bit I struggle with.
Coming to be non-judgmental and to watch truly non-judgmentally, it's really, really hard. I'm not saying I can do it.
Can you do that?
I don't know if you can.
No, I'm not sure you can. Well, I certainly find it very... Because isn't that part of the job?
It
essentially to get... Oh, go on then. What does it depend on?
So I would say it depends on why you're there. Who are you in that scenario? What are you doing there? Am I more senior? Am I there to help you advance your practice to the best that you can be? Am I there to pass judgment on what you're actually doing? Am I assessing you for something? It's like, why are you there? I might have a different opinion to you, which could spark some thinking for you, but does my opinion take precedence?
That's one of the things I think about coach development is really difficult. Is how rarely have I been given clarity either by the deploying agency or by the other person around what my role is. So I find myself clarifying that role to the individual before we start.
Yeah.
So I would have a kind of nearly always, whenever possible, because for somebody to have their first sort of formal coach developer come and watch them and observe them coach, it's a pretty scary thing.
Yeah.
And so for that individual, I always sort of try and pre-clarify what I'm going to be there for them, and also get a sense of what they would like.
Yeah.
So, and it's definitely too. So I usually what I would say is, look, certainly do not think of me as somebody who is senior, somebody who is here to in any way assess or critique. My job is to help you make sense of what's going on in your coaching, and to perhaps sometimes make you aware of things that you might not be aware of.
Yeah.
That then can help you with your learning journey. So I'm just another coach. I'm another pair of eyes, and we can have a conversation afterwards, and I will share with you what I observe, and you can use what I observe as much as you want to or not.
Yeah.
Because I want to kind of disarm them a little bit as much as possible. And usually I find that's helpful. I don't know what you do.
Yeah, I think it's difficult when you go, say you're working with a coach and they're on a course and you're there because you're a tutor capacity. That's a slightly different relationship to if you're going to a club or you're going to assign somebody. It's very different. But when adults are in a learning setting, you have to remember that they bring their entire life experience to your door. So any learning opportunity that they've ever had, so the time that they were in school and they had a terrible lesson, or the time that their granddad gave them some feedback on their cricket, they bring all of that with them to your session, and so you can't just assume that they will be even confident to tell you what they want from you, because they don't necessarily know, or they have an idea of what learning and development looks like, or feedback, or how it feels, more importantly. And I don't know how much time we give to thinking about that. We just sort of bundle up and say, what do you want? All right, let's have a go. I'll give you some ideas about your practice and talk to you about your interpersonal skills.
What do you, so obviously in your time you've worked for a few governing bodies, but in particular you were working in hockey, in the pathway, designing coach development interventions. Big part of that kind of shift away from that technique led, more towards the sort of environmentally driven. And in your role now out there on the ground, working with coaches, observing coaches, guidance, coach ed, all that sort of stuff, what is it that you're seeing that you still think that we've got a way to go on?
I think for me it's really hard because it's not tangible or measurable, but how we showcase people who just have that coaching X factor. So I feel like talking about practice design and whether you should be standing behind a cone or running about in a messy practice is easy to talk about, and it's even, it's easy to go head to head with people on that and have strong disagreements, but to actually unpick why it is that somebody can connect with a group of 5, 6, 7, 30, 40, 60 year olds, and what that is, and how we could manufacture it. Can we manufacture it? Where's it come from? No, it's part of who they are. Is it part of their upbringing? That stuff is really, there's probably loads and loads of research out there into it, but I find it absolutely fascinating that so much of coaching is interpersonal and is behavioural and is that kind of stuff, and yet it's very rarely the bit that we feel comfortable or able to assess people on, employ them on, talk to them about, maybe because for some people it's really hard to change, and some of who I am is who I am, and it would be next to impossible for me to change that because it's part of the way I've been socialised. And it's that stuff, and how brave do we feel about saying to somebody, you know what, you've not got this job, and I know you've got a CV as long as your arm, but actually you didn't connect with them. they didn't warm to you, and that's because of who you are and how you come across. Like,
and we've avoided those conversations because they're so subjective.
So subjective, and it's huge. And I saw your back and forth about uncoachable kids, and and I thought about uncoachable coaches, and I thought, I wonder where that is. You know, where is that when it comes down to the core of somebody and what their personality is and their life experiences up to that point. Can you develop it? I don't know. I've no idea. So I think that's fascinating, and I think it's an area that coaching courses and workshops will begin to talk about, because people are more aware that actually the behavioural competencies of a coach are one of the massive cornerstones of coaching, and then you layer on top of that the sport specific expertise or your approach to learning and development, but who you are and how do we showcase people who either have developed it or have it naturally. That would be interesting if you started to shout about that.
Do you know what though, it's interesting, isn't it, because I wonder sometimes whether we're trying to quantify the unquantifiable.
Yeah.
But then the kind of coach education world, the qualifications world, has definitely lent towards that. Not that they've lent away from that, because they've gone for the things that are observable, measurable, and are objective. But in so doing, I wonder whether there's been generations of coaches qualified year on year who meet the requirements from a criteria perspective, but don't have any of the connection capabilities, just because we can't measure it.
And I think it's where it links to the previous conversation about being brave and candid conversations, is that sometimes the solution to us not having that metric and being able to measure it is to make one up that we do measure it, so that we can avoid a brave conversation and just say to someone, I'm trying to find a word that isn't swearing, but when you deliver, you come across as not very nice. Did you and that's why you've not got the job. We say on this competency, it says you need to be empathetic and make a connection with people, and you didn't do that. So we have another tick sheet to try and have a solid conversation. I don't know, maybe sometimes that's the way that we're even still avoiding actually just having the real chats. So
do you think that on some occasions, and part of the challenge is knowing when, but on some occasions we just need to be more direct?
Yeah, I do, and it's really hard for me to say that, because I also appreciate how valuable coaching workforce and volunteer workforce is, and actually there are people who maybe are not the best fit to whatever they're doing, but they are keen and available, and so therefore you have to approach that directness in a compassionate way. It still has to come from a good place, because you don't want to disenfranchise them, and you don't want to go around being horrible to people and putting them off and making them have a really negative experience. But sometimes there's a balance. I don't know.
What if you're observing a coach, and a coach is really direct to a group of athletes in the same way, using the same rationale and justification? What would be your response to that?
Well, that's the thing. You tie yourself in knots. So a massive thing for me is how we don't treat coaches in the same way as we would approach athlete development. So we suggest that athletes learn by doing. We suggest they need to problem solve. We suggest there isn't one best way. But then when it comes to coach development, coach learning, we do believe there's one best way. Like most governing bodies have a way that they think good coaching looks. So they do have a one best way.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's a negative thing or a positive thing. It just is a thing. We do often give coaches direct feedback, and we tell them what we think and what they should be doing or shouldn't be doing. So our values around learning and development are not consistent. Like if you went back to the epistemology of what you believe the truth and everything is, that's inconsistent. The way we approach people learning in sport is different depending on whether there are people running around or whether they are the people that are coaching. And some of that comes from a good place and for good reason, because ultimately they are responsible for somebody else's experience. So you don't want them to have a calamitous failure and be awful, because that could affect 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 100 players. Like, so there is that's where I just think it's a really interesting area about how do people learn to fly an aeroplane, like a Boeing aeroplane. They must do it in practice, but without endangering the lives of other people. Like, so what's the flight simulator for coaching? And so how can we let people fail badly without crashing an aeroplane into the ground? It's if we believe that failure helps them to develop, how do we do that? Can we manufacture it? Can we manufacture opportunities for coaches to fail so they can fail forwards?
Fail without feeling like a failure.
Yeah, that's a politician's answer to your question about what would I do if a coach was telling players. I'd ask them what they were hoping to achieve.
You'd need to understand their intent first.
You need to understand their intent. You need to understand what they were trying to achieve, where it was coming from, why they chose that delivery method.
Because being direct's okay, as long as they are fully aware of why they have done that, and they're using that approach very deliberately.
Yeah.
Being really direct and instructional and telling just because that's what you know is a very different thing.
Yes, you have choice.
And so the understanding is why you're using the method, not the method itself.
Yes.
That's my problem with a lot of the stuff we've been doing in the coach ed space. Is all we do is observe the method or the behaviour, and we make a judgment call on whether that method or behaviour is suitable against a set of criteria, as opposed to saying, tell me more about why you opted for that particular method at that time.
Yeah.
And if someone said to me, well, do you know what, I was really worried it was going to get unsafe, so I stepped in with an instruction just to stop it, well, that's perfectly acceptable, as opposed to, let me just ask a few questions, oh, someone's just got in the head.
Yeah. And I think that's it. So you can't observe a practice and assume someone's philosophy.
Exactly.
It can't. So if you delivered a session and I delivered a hockey session for athletes, it would probably be games based.
Yes.
There'd probably be lots of questions. There'd probably be problem setting. There might be some small group discussions or pair share. It would probably look quite similar.
Yeah.
My conversations with you very much show me that you come from that, because from a skill acquisition perspective, and that's why you would precedent that approach. For me, I'm not saying I don't subscribe to that, but really mine comes from the fact that my philosophy is I believe people learn from others and with others, and in making connections with others and making the sense of the world through the way that they connect with other people.
Oh, I'm with you on that. So that's where I come from. The skill acquisition is just the bonus. It's the icing on the cake.
So but somebody else might come from a skill acquisition perspective. So what you see might evidence and look the same, but actually why you've chosen that in the very beginning. So why do I choose to do a games-based approach when I have kids in a hockey session? Well, because that's the USP of that session, is that there are other people there.
Yes.
As a kid, I spent hours playing hockey by myself in the garden. I didn't have other people.
Yeah.
So the benefit and the bonus is, one, you're on a lovely surface, and two, you've got other people. So that's the USP of that opportunity. So make the most of that opportunity. Take advantage of that opportunity. You can do stuff by yourself when you're by yourself. Why would you do stuff by yourself when you're in a group setting and you've got opportunity to do something else?
Loads of other people around me to play with, and we'll do stuff in isolation.
Yeah. So that's where it comes. And for me, it's like making sense of the world and using each other to ask questions and look at that person. How did they do that well? That's the nugget of that environment, is that there are loads of other people to learn from.
The other layer I would add on to that is, so partly it's about the kind of social learning model that you just talked about, but for me it's also because that process of social engagement through play, to me, is like one of those kind of like intrinsic values that every child deserves and doesn't get enough of. And so for me, I am 100% going to, and unapologetically going to, reject any notion that we need to make the sports experience like, it's like, well, once you've done the work, I'll allow you some play. We've got to reject that. Because actually, here's a group of young people coming together. Play. Now, if I can just sprinkle a bit of stardust on that with a few little clever constraints, which means that the play also is enriched, so that we might get some learning, that's got to be the winner.
And I wholeheartedly subscribe to that, and my challenge to myself, to others, is how do we take a little bit of that essence and make it apply to developing coaches?
Yeah.
Like,
it's hard.
It's hard.
So
it's really
hard.
But I don't think it's impossible. I'm not sure.
No, definitely not impossible.
I'm not sure I have the answers, or anybody does yet. But it's there. Like, that sounds like really cool. Collections of people together. They're making connections. Maybe there's some constraints and some parameters around it, so that they have to figure out their solutions. I don't. Like, can we do that? Like, yeah.
I think we can, because if we understand that in order to learn anything, you need context.
Yeah.
You need a situation.
Yeah.
You need a task. And we can make the learning based situational.
Yeah.
For coaches, in the same way we're making, the reason why we've taken this approach with athlete development around, right, here's a list of techniques that you must have. We've applied that to coaches. I've talked about this. Why would we expect coaches to be anything other than the product of their education?
Yeah.
Their education was, here are the core techniques of a coach. Once you know them, that's it. Right? Forget, like, you're going to go into an environment and be challenged by a group of young people who are all individuals.
Yeah.
And some of them are going to be deemed to be uncoachable. Yeah. Why? Because they won't adhere to the techniques that you were taught. Well, it might just be that those techniques aren't really suitable to this particular individual. So my view is, we can do this, but it takes a bit of skill and it takes a bit more resource than we've typically thrown at it.
I think seeing coaches as people and giving them the support that they need to do what they need to do, I do think it's massively under-resourced, and being free to be creative. And that's why my role is interesting, because I think sometimes what you see of the product of coach education or coach development is manufactured by the structures and the systems and the metrics that are put around them. So how do people get the money? Well, they get the money by evidencing an impact of something. Well, how do you evidence impact of something? Well, you have to write it down, or put a number on it, or do something like that, because that's the only way we can evidence it, because as we've said, it's all very soft and fluffy and intangible. So what are the tangibles? And that drives a certain behaviour. So we live in a world of unintended consequences where everything bumps into everything else. There isn't a system. There isn't an objective reality of a sports system or a governing body system. We are all it, in one sense or another. Whether you're an academic or a coach or a player, whatever your sport, you're all connected in this massive tangled web of people, relationships, and that's why they have to be at the centre, because that is what ties us together. Yes, some of those relationships, people might have more power or influence, or might be dishing out cash or certificates, or whatever it might be. So some of those bonds might be a bit thicker in one direction than another, but ultimately we are all it. And as one person acts or doesn't act, the whole thing shifts for everybody else. That's why the relationship piece, for me, I come back to, because that's what I'm really passionate about, and I do think will make the difference. It's not about objective realities of this is the governing body telling this person what to do and this is the structure. It's not. We are all people, and everybody's trying to do the best at what they do. And how can funding agencies and governing bodies support people, whether that's volunteers or coaches, to actually do what they want to do to the best of their ability? It's hard. It's really hard. It's a mind melt, and I don't know whether there are good answers out there, but I do think the way that we've approached player development, athlete development, there are probably some lessons learned to be taken to how.
Well, we know what it's not.
Yeah. And I'm like, people are really anti-workshop. Like, workshops get a really bad rep, and they get, but like, bad workshops are bad.
Yeah.
But why does a workshop or a qualification? I know people are really anti-workshops qualifications, but they're only rubbish if they're rubbish. So there is still a place for formal learning if it's delivered well. So how well do we support the people who are tutoring and facilitating those?
I suppose the problem is that we've only ever had bad formal learning.
Yeah.
Or generally, bad formal learning, which is there's the 58 PowerPoint slides that the person in front is going to literally look and read, and we sit and go, this is great. That's because that's predominantly what people have got. So actually, the challenge isn't necessarily to go, let's not do workshops anymore because formal learning's bad. It's let's do better formal learning.
Again, it's really hard not to swear on your podcast, but like shit formal learning is shit. But formal learning on its own is a neutral phrase. Formal learning is a neutral phrase, and if you could then that leads you to thinking about how do the members of staff in governing bodies support the workforce who do that formal learning. What qualifications training have they had? How was that delivered? Where have they come from? How did you hire them? Who are those people? What materials did you give them, and how did you look after them? And that's what I mean about this being a humongous web of everybody is connected. That's why I love what I do. But it does get a little bit obsessive at times, and sometimes I think, oh crumbs, it's too big. I can't do this.
But that's what keeps us coming back for more.
Yeah, totally.
Listen, we're about on time because there's some people waiting to do the next phase of what we've got to do today. But I'm glad we could grab this time to have this conversation.
Thank you.
You're pretty active on Twitter, so people can find you there if they want to ask you more questions or get in touch. What's your handle?
At LuckyMoore15 on Twitter.
Lucky Lucy Moore.
Exactly. That was a name I acquired at football, so they love a nickname. Welcome people's thoughts. I'm currently studying for my professional doctorate, and that is kind of the content of it. Is how do we change the system to see it more as a figuration or a network of people, and how do we help those people to do their jobs really well. If anybody knows the answer to that question, that would be awesome. It would save me some work.
Lucy, thank you very much.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Talent Equation podcast. If you like the show, then please consider supporting it by leaving a review on your favorite podcast player, telling your friends about it, or even becoming a hero and show your appreciation by becoming a patron. Just head over to thetalentequation.co.uk and click on the Becoming a Patron button at the top of the page.
So there you have it. Great conversation. Very pleased to be able to spend some time chatting to Lucy. We cross paths a lot, as I mentioned. We're very often walking past each other in corridors and all that sort of stuff, and I've been saying to her, we must get that date in to have a conversation, and it just transpired that we were in the same place, and so it was great to be able to have that conversation with her. Great just to hear about her story, that particular element that she's illuminated for me around the whole idea of the idea of ruinous empathy, and it's made me reflect on, maybe perhaps when we've been coaches, and the whole idea of just let the kids play is one of those things where we're actually abdicating our responsibility in order to help them learn and develop, but in the most in a way that's going to be as engaging as possible for them. And that's and so maybe we're always in that space between being focused on them, being focused on us, and making sure that we get the balance point right. So that's a big reflection for me. For those of you who are listening in, just a quick announcement really, that there are some spaces available in the Conclave, which is the private learning mastermind group that I have with a group of intrepid individuals who come together to share challenges and co-create solutions. If you want to join, head over to the website and click on the Patreon link, and you'll see the option to join there, and then I'll email you with the details to join. Look forward to seeing you soon. Have a great week of coaching, and remember, ditch those drills.